got one question here. I want to give a shout out to my mate Jamie as well, because he actually came up with these questions with me, and we started writing them probably about 5 months ago, 6 months ago. We spent a long time doing it, and these questions actually had to change from that time. Like, I think we started in, like, must have been February or March,
Yeah.
possibly earlier, I don't know. But yeah, like some of them I had to take out because they weren't relevant, or something's changed. But yeah, so this one's is relevant because it is interesting, and be good to hear your take on it. How sustainable is Equality FC, with both the men's and women's hoping to achieve promotion to higher leagues in the next few seasons?
I think that you have to, and as a club, we can see this, that there is equality and there's also equity, and I think that two of them are becoming more and more interlinked as we move up. The challenge with Equality FC has always been that, what about if one team needs more than the other to achieve their goals? So what's very clear is the landscape on the women's in women's football is changing massively. If we go back 5 years to when we first started or when we first got the license to operate in the championship, there were clubs there that some clubs potentially would have had tiny playing budgets, and ours was a good budget, and we probably punched below our weight, I think, for the first season in that league. And then all of a sudden you can see the opportunity flashing in front of some of the parent club eyes, and they start investing heavily. And how that has changed is that potentially the amount of playing budget required to gain that one promotion place, which again is just the most ridiculous thing. Only have promotion place. Has increased year on year, and it's increased, way above what we would consider to be wage inflation. And when you have teams like Liverpool playing in the same league as us, you realise that it's almost impossible to compete financially with some of these clubs. So to us, equality does mean, equal sharing of resources. We still today have playing budgets the playing budgets that we set at the start of the season are the same. But we realise that in order for the women to get into the Super League, going to take, one of three scenarios. One is the leagues are restructured so that there are more teams in the Super League, which, based on the fact that we have so many empty weekends with no games at the moment, is what's called for. And if you look at the levels below us, in step 3, so the league below the championship, got Newcastle United and Burnley. Burnley have got very, very big famous US owners. Obviously, Newcastle United are playing, play friendlies in front of 10,000-12,000 people. So we know that there's going to come a point where women's football is right for that restructure, and whether that restructure means you'll have 16 teams in the Super League and 16 teams in the Championship, so essentially, going up by about 30% in those two levels. That could be where there's an opportunity for us. That could be where there's an opportunity for us to be in one of those top 16 clubs, and we have to just try and find a way in which we can compete to get there. Obviously, the second thing that could happen is someone with a bit of investment who wants to donate into the club comes along, and we can look at funding it that way. The third way that comes in is over time we develop our own pathway, we develop our own academy, and you become a selling club. You develop the talent, you bring it on, and you sell it on, and that's where you start funding some of it from your development from. But it's tough, and it's a question that we talk about regularly, about what does equality mean today? What should it mean in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years time? I mean, we know that we've got similar, but not quite as the same challenges, same magnitude of challenges on the men's side. You know, we know that there are clubs in our league that are throwing 5-figure per week sums at their budget, you know, way ahead of us. So we have to challenge on that as well, and we have to think about how we can work on that. And I think for the men's team, it's slightly different because we know we've got a management team that is able to find some of these really, really good players, young players, bring them through, and then see how we can move them on. And I think we just need to refine that model, and that might give us the revenue. But we're not looking at the moment as to how we break that equality stance. We're looking at how we can develop it, and what does equality mean over time.
Okay, yeah. Going back to the pathways that you said, one particular pathway that seems to have worked for teams like Brentford and Brighton, for example, I don't know to the extent, but with data analytics. And I asked JT about this, and I just think it's not like I'm massive on it. I just think it's an interesting thing about with football is the use of data, and like with XG, blah 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 blah, all that stuff. And is that a potential pathway? And how useful is that, would you say, with the men's and the women's sides? Like, how often is it, you know, played in? I'm just quite interested.
The whole data side of our club has changed massively over 2.5 years. If I look at on the men's side, one of the things that really sort of attracted us to talking about talking to Tony and Joe was their knowledge of players in and around the non-leagues, that almost on a positional basis. So it's like, okay, we need a left back. Okay, well, there was this guy that played against us for so-and-so. He was really good. He did this, but he was rubbish in the air and things like that. Now, I always remember there's a book written by, it's about scouting, Mike Calvin. And I mean, it was a few years ago because it was when David Moyes was in charge at Everton, and he went into Everton and he said they had this one wall that was just this, a massive whiteboard, and it was every position, so from goalkeeper to centre forward, and under each position were 4 or 5 sections, and it was things like direct replacement, youngster, wild card, and in every one there were people's names. So the idea being is that their scouting would constantly be looking at this set of players, and it would be right. So they need a left back, and they want an up and coming left back. So there were 2 or 3 names in there. So these are people that have been spotted, and then they would then take that, and then they would start looking at stats on them. And as stats become more and more available, then that starts building that picture. What we have at the moment is we generate a lot of stats about the game. So we have so our VO cameras, so the cameras that follow the play. Obviously, you know, we use one of those for every match and training, and that footage is analysed. Every player has a GPS, and the GPS tracks. They become so much more intelligent, and you know, I'll give you a really good idea as to how this works. And sometimes you may see this during the season, but we now have so Henderson, so Tony's son, who you'll see, you know, around the squad and everything like that. He's 17 years old. He is our in-game analyst. So he sits on the bench and he has his tablet that monitors the activity of every single one of our players in real time.
Okay.
And for example, at Leatherhead last Saturday, he spotted that one of our players, their stats were suggesting that they were at a point where they were too fatigued enough that they could become injured, so a muscular injury. So we substituted him, and some people will think, well, hang on a minute, he was having quite a good game. Why have we brought him off?
Yeah.
And the reason being is because the stats are suggesting that actually he could be prone to an injury. So that's how we're using stats in real time. We have a data partner called Data Talks.
Yeah.
And Data Talks is a platform that enables us to put a lot of data together and start making some meaningful interpretations and analytics from the data. And again, I think that that's going to become more and more relevant for us.
Mm.
And where we get to a point is where you can, if you look at, say, for example, the whole Moneyball approach. Moneyball was driven by the amount of available data on baseball players. There's not yet that amount of available data on footballers. You can look at, how old they are, what foot. You can look at in the professional game, things like completed passes, tackles, things like that. But the actual core elements for us are about, what distances are people running? What's their recovery time from a run? Things like that you can't get publicly. But there'll come a point where you'll be able to, my view is you'll be able to buy access to that type of data. And that then makes your recruitment a whole different ballgame.
Okay. Yeah. That's really interesting. That really ties in really well with my next question. About how you said about how with the knowledge of non-league players that Tony and 𝐒𝐞𝐬 have, that you rewind about a couple seasons ago, we had Adam Drew as head of recruitment, and I was also, I'm guessing, I think I know the answer to this now, but what is the process in finding players like Fraser Shaw, Ronnie Vince, 𝐒𝐞𝐫𝐞𝐿, and who's in charge of these processes to find these players now? Could you give some examples?
Yeah. So I think what Adam did, interestingly, Adam approached Tony. He said they never really know each other, and he said, and when Tony had obviously first come in and he's trying to build a new team, Adam said, look, Adam had just left Concord at the time. He'd worked with Concord and Danny Scopes and taken them to Wembley in the FA Trophy, which obviously he never mentions to anybody at all. And what he was able to do is he was able to give a perspective from players at step 2. And that, again, was really important because, Tony and Joe's background had been very much with step 4 and 3.
Yeah.
And Adam gave us step 2 and step 1. And that was really important to us. So we were able to leverage him. And again, he's got networks of people, so he was able to put us in touch with people. Adam obviously then took the role at Chelmsford, which is where he lives. So obviously he was traveling all the way down to Lewes. So
okay.
But what Tony and Joe have got is they've built a network, and they've got a really good network. We know, they're very close to, for example, Russell Martin, who's now gone on at Southampton, the 𝐒𝐞𝐬s when they were at Portsmouth, because these guys have got background in non-league. Russell Martin's a Lewes owner. He's his academy, Russell Martin Academy, is based in our area. The 𝐒𝐞𝐬s obviously, non-league background at Concord as well. So you build these networks, and then they have people that they used to play football with themselves or are involved in clubs. So, there's Tony's got very good relationships in with Spurs, and with Charlton, Crystal Palace. And you start growing these networks, and it's about reaching out. And obviously clubs nowadays have squads of players in the dozens. So those players need time. They need to be able to play somewhere. So you start leveraging those contacts. You start talking about, who's available and things like that. But I would say that the way we play football is attractive to players.